I am Heather Florio, the CEO of Desert Harvest, and happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Joining me today, we have Dee Hartman and Elizabeth Wood, the author of The Pleasure Prescription. And we're going to talk about sex today, folks. Let's dive right in and start. Why don't you start by telling us, Dee, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. And tell us a little bit about why you both decided to write this book.
Right. The book is really a compilation of our life experiences. I was a women's health physical therapist specialized in the treatment of treating women with chronic vulvar pain and sexual dysfunction. Elizabeth and I had met a number of years ago and decided to get together and put her experience with my experience. And Elizabeth, your experience?
So when Dee and I met, we were working together at a holistic center, bringing together a number of different aspects regarding to women's sexual health. I, at that point, was a licensed sex therapist. And so that is a very different lens through which I viewed the client. And obviously, you as the physical therapist, her ability to view the client from that perspective. Over the years after we both left that clinic, we found each other, on the phone to one another saying, I've got a pain client and I'm not sure what to do. So we would consult on my client, and then she would cross the hallway, so to speak, by telephone, and she would call me when she wanted to know a little bit more how to help her patients, because it was clients and patients, help them understand pleasure and how to feel pleasure in their body. So it makes sense to get together and write this book.
Perfect. And so who is kind of this book for? What kind of audience did you write this book for?
It's for women who suffer with vulvar pain, their partners, physical therapists, physicians, psychologists. It really is, from what we've heard from the reviews, it works for everyone. It's certainly not too complicated for women with chronic vulvar pain to read and to enjoy on their own. And it's set up with there's a case study at the beginning and then a set of prescriptions at the end of each chapter. So it works well to incorporate it in. I've had a number of women's health physical therapists tell me they have patients read it, and as they're reading it, they go through the book in their practice and they talk about the prescriptions and they use it that way. Physicians have passed it out to their patients. Psychologists have passed it out to their patients. So it's been a wonderful ride. It's only been out for about a year and a half, so it's really been a fun experience.
And can you tell us a little bit more? I read this book and really enjoyed, you talk about starting with the case studies, going in a little bit more in depth, and then ending with those prescriptions. Can you tell us a little bit more about those prescriptions and kind of how they function?
Go ahead.
I think it's what worked in our private practices. And so, I'll just take one, knowing your vulva. Really what I found is when vulva-bodied people began to first look, so many people in my client base had never looked at themselves. And so it worked beautifully on behalf of the majority of my clients, that it seemed to just warrant inclusion in the book. So we Dee and I, there were way more than 22 that we could have put in there, but we thought those best represented what helped our clients help themselves.
And specifically, the prescriptions at the end of each chapter deal with the issues of the case study introduced, with all of the descriptive narrative in between. So it really is reading about a woman and her experiences and how we talk about it and how to deal with the issues that she had in the case study. So each chapter is a case study and a treatment in and of its own.
And then, so you kind of start off the book too, really kind of defining what sexual dysfunction is, what it is, and how the medical community defines it. Can you kind of give, an overview so that, our listeners here can kind of understand what that encompasses and where it kind of goes wrong?
Go for
I'll
it.
leave that to you. No, I'll leave that to you.
You're past it.
I love it.
The reason that I'm doing that is because, so I'll answer from my perspective. So as a practicing sex therapist, at that time, I think we were with the DSM, it's been a decade. We were using the DSM-3, possibly 4. And at that time, there were 4 classified sexual dysfunctions. So a person or a couple, they were dysfunctional in one of 4 categories that didn't fit most of my clients. Most of my clients ended up being either uneducated, undereducated, or misinformed about their bodies, their sex, and their sexuality. So that's actually the reason the medical model wasn't working for me, because just because a person or a couple didn't know the ABCs of sex, I cringe at having to label them as dysfunctional. So that's the reason that I walked away from my license, 11 years in good standing, and I sought other modalities of sexual teachings and sexual awareness and practices. And I've never looked back. I've never regretted walking away from that license. So for me, from that perspective, the medical model of dysfunction did not work.
And from me on the traditional Western medicine side, the first talk I gave about sex to physical therapists was in 1997, and basically the talk was listing all of the dysfunctions related to sex. And interestingly, fast forward to even today, when we talk about problems with sex, we only talk about sexual dysfunctions, interestingly, because sexual dysfunctions are what have been researched and treated by professionals in the Western medicine world. Um, Interestingly, the research that in just for instance defines female sexual arousal, the research was done in a lab with with vulva owners laying on a table with 2 different leads, one measuring the temperature and one measuring the mucus production into the vagina while watching 3D pornography. And the rating of how her temperature went up or how much mucus she produced was a level of showed arousal, sexual arousal, by watching an erotic film compared to a neutral film. And we just, as a physical therapist who deals with function and trying to find out the cause of the problem and then helping to strategize to help women make it better, this really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's another piece of all that we're doing, but it's not very functional because we really don't know much about normal, plain, down and dirty, cisgendered female sexual function from an anatomical and functional perspective. That's kind of the problem.
Yeah, that study you mentioned, that would be so limiting because everybody has a different method of arousal, and you can't box just one person in. So I can completely
Yes.
understand that.
Yes.
And then let's put up some pictures here and let's delve into anatomy. Let's kind of start with the basics of the anatomy of the vagina. And then we've got here your clitoris model. Maybe we could start there.
This is advanced. If we could go back to the beginning and look at just the textbook vulva, that probably would help.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go. Get us started. And this is what you typically see in textbooks. This is the textbook vulva. There's no variety. There's no, you can't really see any pubic hair. The labia have basically been cut off. It gives us an idea that the vulva is located between the legs, but other than that, it doesn't really give us a whole lot. And to be clear, the vulva it's kind of a parallelogram in that area below the top of the mons, or that area in between the legs, and to just above the external anal sphincter and out to the folds of the legs. That entire area is referred to as the vulva. It's the outside portion.
Perfect. And then you've got, there we go. We got a little bit more internal.
Perfect. Now we're getting a sense of what happens when we go just into the first layer of the pelvic floor muscles. Pelvic floor muscles basically have two layers. Some suggest three. From the old school, I still only talk about two layers of muscle, a superficial pelvic floor and a deep pelvic floor. And that's what the superficial pelvic floor almost forms a triangle support around the vaginal and urethral and clitoris, and the vaginal opening, the clitoris and the urethra comes down and then forms the external anal sphincter. On deep into the deep pelvic floor is a much bigger, broader muscle, and that's what really pulls up and in when we contract and relax. This is, interestingly, this is not the picture that I thought I sent, but that's not a problem at all. This is looking at a side view, a cross section of what it looked like. You have the pubic bone in the front on the right side. Right behind that is the bladder with the urethra going down and out. On to the left is the uterus with the cervix at the top of the vaginal canal, which is just behind the urethra. On back in the middle between the vagina and the rectum, the anus is the perineal body, the anus leading up to the rectum. So that's everything that is inside. I always chuckle when I see this picture because I think, who decided this was a good idea when you've got all of this stuff going on in here, and we're supposed to be able to have this penetrative sex and everything be okay, or we're supposed to be able to use sex toys, and if there's a problem with the rectum, or if there's a problem with the urethra or the bladder or the uterus, things can get in the way.
Yes, definitely. That is definitely indicative of that. And then back to the clitoris.
Back to the lovely, glorious new clitoral model that we have just started importing from Germany. It's the first model that really shows true clitoral complex anatomy. It sits on top of, it's a two-piece model. The green and yellow down below represent the vaginal opening, the urethra, the urethral meatus where the urine comes out. The clitoris sits on top of that. But the clitoris, you can see, is a lot bigger than just the glands, which is what we thought for many, many, many years was the clitoris, right? It wasn't until 1996 that we really knew, thanks to Helen O'Connell, what the entire clitoris looked like. But this is really it. It has the clitoral glands. It has a neck and a body that come up to the knee, that come down and on either side form the crura, the legs of the clitoris. It connects back into the vestibular bulbs are down below, and they come back and connect into right to the glands. So the clitoris, the pink part, the light colored part, is all erectile tissue, but the glands and the commissure coming down into the clitoral bulbs are not. They can become very engorged, but they don't actually become erect like the pinks, the tissue in the clitoris itself up here.
Perfect. Yeah. And I mean, for goodness sakes, we just mapped the full nerve endings of the clitoris for the first time in November 2022. We're a little behind.
We used to think it was only 10,000. Now, 8,000, excuse me,
Yeah.
8,000. Mind you, that compares to 4,000 in the entire penis, including the penis, which it glands. They have a glands just like in the clitoris. Mm-hmm. And it was always thought that the women had that vulva, that clitoris owners, clitoris had 10,000 nerve endings, but they've done a recent study and it's over 11,000. So, and that's truly just at the glands, just at the tip end of the clitoris. So it's a pretty exciting place to be.
And so one of the things that we really talk about, and maybe we can put up this picture. So of this is an amazing piece of artwork of a wall of vulvas and vaginas here, and this is the artist, and this is at Weems, the Wilzig Erotic Art Museum in Miami, and it's beautiful. And let's see if we have something a little bit closer, if we can get this to come up. But I thought I'd bring this up as we kind of you talk about in your book, both of you, that, no two vaginas are going to look the same. No two vulvas are going to look the same. And so this was very indicative. And this one, interestingly enough, in this piece of artwork, I wish we could make it bigger or see it, but all of these individual vulvas were from even transgender, non-binary, cisgender, a variety of different, but it kind of shows the overall complexity. So I'll let you guys talk about how you overview this in your book.
So basically, we're all different. I mean, I'll highlight a story. I have 3 sisters. We all look completely different. Our eyes are different, our noses are different, and the lips on our face are different. I never for 1 second contemplated what our genital anatomy looked like. So there's a story in the book. I just celebrated my 10-year wedding anniversary. And there's a story from our wedding. My sister had to help me lift up my gown. And so I thought I'd had enough vodka at the reception to say to her, what do your lips look like? And she's like, underneath my dress, I hear, well, I can wear the burgundy shades, or maybe it was the pink shades. And I think you can wear a deeper lipstick. And I thought, well, that's not what I'm talking about. So I bopped her on the head and I said, no, the lips down there. I said, I'm just curious. And then I was like even more bold. And I said, go get the other 2 sisters. I want to do a show and tell. My sisters and I, not a single one of us have a vulva shape, size, or color that matches the other. And for some reason, we think we're supposed to be asymmetrical, when that's not how we work in nature. Our eyes are different. The nostrils. Sorry. Everyone believes that we're supposed to be symmetrical, and that is absolutely not the truth. So I'll tell one more story. I have a dear friend who lives in Iceland. She is also a vulvologist, and she's also a teacher. And so she put up a wall of vulvas, much like the artist. She put up a small graphic, and the vulva owners in her classroom said, well, those aren't our vulvas. And she said, well, whatever do you mean? And she said, well, those aren't necessarily Icelandic women. And she said, well, no, this is probably a variety of women from all over the world. And so she thought they still didn't understand vulvar diversity. So she did a small pilot study where she was given a grant to photograph vulva owners who were born and still lived in Iceland. And about 4 months later, the project was finished, and she put up the Great Wall of Vulvas from Icelandic vulva owners only, and they're beautifully diverse, different. And, she normalized for her classroom the truth about genital diversity. And it's the same in a cock-bodied person as well. Shape, size, and color are different across the board.
That's wonderful. And so I know that in the book, and maybe we can just briefly overview this, because I know that there are several pages to this, but you talk about being able to explore and look and know your own vagina. What does it look like? What does the vulva look like? What does your vaginal opening look like? You can look at all of this, and I thought maybe you guys could kind of overview this a little bit.
It's really interesting. If I could, Elizabeth, we go through this a lot as women's health PTs, that women really don't know the difference, and they're, comedians have talked about this. It's a very popular thing that people don't like to say the word vulva. Yeah. Because well, vagina is okay, but just not vulva. And I was talking with someone not too long ago. He said, I think the problem is that when God got to women, he was a little tired. and he needed to kind of replicate some of the anatomy that he had built elsewhere. And he'd already made our face, right? He already made our face and our lips and down into our stomach. And he used that same pattern down below. So you would never imagine calling your face a throat, right? It's your face and your lips. It's not your throat. The same is down below. It's the vulva on the outside where the lips truly are down there that lead up into the vagina.
Yep.
So it's a little bit of anatomy. I'm a pixie, I get stuck on it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, because we throw around these terms, definitely vulva, vagina, vestibule, and so we're definitely getting into, and we can even bring back up that picture maybe of the opening and kind of show this as she's talking about. Maybe we can overview here just a little bit again. The one without the internal part.
Yeah.
So here we go. So where maybe you can describe a little bit better so that then we can understand as we throw around these terms, they can understand it a little better.
Yeah. And I haven't actually done this. This has just come to me. If we think about the lips, the mouth lips and the gums on the inside into the mouth and the throat, the lips on the labia here, this is lips and gum and mouth and throat. And on the vulva, it's labia on the outside. The introitus is right at the opening of the vaginal canal. So it's just inside where the hair-bearing skin joins the mucosal tissue. And that's where the vagina begins. It's a threshold from the outside, from the vulva, over the vestibule, just like coming in a house or a vestibule anywhere else, and coming into the vaginal canal.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah, that'll definitely help with as we throw around all of these terms. And then one of the things that you really described very well is the different types of medical and non-medical surgical or sexual pain. Can we kind of briefly overview here that and kind of the neurocognitive effects?
Elizabeth, I'll let you want to. None that, again, when we're talking what happens medically, there's a lot of things that go on medically with pain, with pain, with dermatologic disease, with cancer. Those are all very medical kinds of things. But what we're talking about specifically in the book is a lack of arousal and the lack of mucus production, primarily associated with anything coming into any kind of penetration into the vaginal canal. So that basically is the difference. That's where we are going away from the medical model. We're not saying that medical model doesn't exist and all these problems aren't there, but what we're suggesting is that we need to pay a little more attention to arousal and mucus production. Elizabeth, you want to elaborate more on that?
Well, so I think that to be clear to who haven't read the book, Dee's section on the anatomy of pain, where she very thoroughly describes all the diagnoses that most typically a person who suffers from vulvar or vaginal pain, they may have heard those words from their doctor, they may not. So that's part of the first section of the book where we really help our readers understand the anatomy of pain and the terms such as, dyspareunia, vulvodynia, vestibulitis. I mean, some of those are still used, some of them aren't. And so he has written a beautiful description of the pain diagnosis. So what we are saying and what we have found is that when there's more arousal in the body, there's an inverse correlation between pain and pleasure. So when a person feels a tremendous amount of pain, their pleasure threshold is almost non-existent. And so if you can increase the pleasure in their daily life, and I'm not just talking about sexual pleasure, but if you can increase their pleasure, that diminishes the pain. And so we have the pleasure prescription was written so that our readers can help themselves diminish the pain. And we also obviously do not neglect the need for physical therapy. Often sex therapists, other people who would help them really understand the source of their pain so that that can be diminished, allowing a more pleasure forward and pleasure filled existence.
So what would be, so we've mentioned a lot of, and I think this, vulvodynia, dyspareunia, vestibulitis, we have these medical terms, and we have these medical, for sexual pain, that conditions that could experience sexual pain, interstitial cystitis, other things. What are some non-medical types of pain that can be experienced?
Emotional pain. If you are experiencing a non-vaginal / vulvar disorder, if you have chronic back pain, if you are on any type of medication that is going to diminish your experience of pleasure. And then let's talk about relationship pain. Perhaps you aren't in relationship, whether willingly or unwillingly. But if you are in relationship and that relationship is causing you stress and grief, that is a type of, if you will, non-physical pain, but emotional pain. What if you have a partner that is commissioned overseas 8 months out of the year? What if you have, or what if you're the one who travels away from your family and is only home on the weekends? It makes it more difficult to stay connected and in the yummy flow of a vibrant relationship, which then allows for a healthier and more vibrant and more frequent sex life. So those are kind of some examples. What if you're under financial stress? All these are non-medical. However, they play big roles in affecting how we feel at our sexual core.
Yeah, well, we also,
you also kind of talk about the hardwiring of the brain too, as it relates to pain, and being able to kind of rewire. One of the things that you talk about is the 4-day, repetition methodology for hardwiring one's brain. Can you go into that about these non-medical approaches to being able to rewire to be able to enjoy sex?
Sure. You know what, and I just want to add on what Elizabeth just said. We also can't forget the normal life cycle of a vulva owner. Going through the childbearing years can create pain and discomfort with sex. Perimenopause, as estrogen is starting to drop, and going into menopause are totally normal situations, but they can cause painful sex. And with the rewiring, the 4-day plan, actually the 4-day win, was a book that I read a very long time ago, and we added in because it made so much sense. And she's a PhD psychologist, and her theory is that from all the people she's talked to, it appears that if you're talking about playing tennis or playing golf or eating right or choose whatever it is, and you say, well, Heather, do you play tennis? And you're either going to say, no, I don't. Okay, you don't. Do you play tennis? Oh, I played that once. I did it once. Or do you play tennis? Well, I've done it a couple of times. Again, do you play tennis? Well, I've done it a few times, but I can't really say I play tennis. But after that, after 4 repetitions, and again, this is just her theory, after 4 repetitions, Heather, do you play tennis? You say, well, yeah, I do play tennis. And that positive reinforcement back into your brain makes you realize that this is something that you do without really thinking about it. It's a habituation, if you will. And that's kind of how you learn habits. Once you become habituated to whatever it is, your brain starts to create these neural pathways. The neurotransmitters flow very easily along that pathway. And that's typically how we learn things. I mean, our brain keeps us safe from danger. if there's something that has caused us pain in the past and we have that reflex loop that says, wait, stop, don't go there. So I can't get into all the brain science. I'm not a neuroscientist, but we know that the brain gets wired for injury. The injury goes away, but it still perceives pain. That's actually just a new listing that's being added by the International Pain Society, and that's nociplastic pain. It's pain caused by either trauma or memory, but it's not a distal injury of tissue, but it's from a memory. And it also includes all sorts of myofascial pain. So as you talk about IC, we talk about endometriosis, we talk about IBS, we talk about chronic low back pain and vulvar pain. All of those kinds of things traditionally in the literature get clumped together as parts of chronic pelvic pain. And this new construct suggests that maybe they all just go together. And with the visceral interactions and the visceral somatic interactions, that it all just gets clumped together and causes this central sensitization, which is a very common term that we know about, that just makes us think that it hurts when there's really nothing there that's causing the pain. It's a chronic pain condition. So all sorts of neurochemicals are involved. And again, can't begin to go there and do it justice. All I can tell you, the one thing that I always remember is we have to remember that any kind of pleasure, whatever pleasure it is, creates opioids, natural opioids and opioids in our body. And that's our feel-good chemicals. And that's what we need to be happy, which is why we stress the use of pleasure for so much of what we do.
Perfect segue into my next question then. All right. So let's delve into pleasure, and let's start with your feel good triad of arousal, pleasure, and sensuality. Can you both talk a little bit about this and this methodology that you've developed?
Yeah, so we're, in addition to help the reader and our general audience understand pleasure as its own construct. Pleasure, we typically think about like sexual pleasure. And we're saying that's one part of pleasure. But feeling pleasure is noticing, the scent to a specific perfume. Pleasure can be the time that you spend outside walking with your dog or other type of walkable animal. So we really expand the definition of pleasure to include sensuality. And so sensuality is the second part of our triad, and sensuality is very different from sexuality. It's a huge, major component of us really living a fully expressed sexual life. But without sensuality, it's my opinion that sex is a little bit flat, if you will. It doesn't mean that, for myself, I mean, I've had quickies, where I've really enjoyed the sensation. However, when I put in taste, sound, smell, sight, and of course, touch, that whole sensual experience, once I fold that into my sexual activity, it just brightens the entire experience. You could think that it's a difference between sex, simple sex for sex sake, versus the art of lovemaking. And the art of lovemaking includes sensuality. So the third part of the triad is arousal. So often with the pain patients, arousal it's the last thing on their mind. And so arousal is what's necessary for us to have a pleasurable experience of sex. So we've lumped them all together to say pleasure, arousal, and sensuality are the feel-good triad. They're all beautifully expressed on their own, but put them together and have magical experience.
Perfect. And Dee, I know you described this concept with you and your husband, and I love it. Can we talk about the 24/7 foreplay methodology?
You better believe it. Somewhere in all of my files, I have a book with, I think, 6 or 7 titles for that book for the 24/7 foreplay. It really, if you think about your life, whoever, whatever, if it's a partner, whatever that partner, and you really don't take the time to do things together. You're living your life. Maybe you have a couple of kids, you're both working, you're busy, and you make it work, your family works, your everything looks very functional, yet you don't take the time to hug, to touch, to kiss, to snuggle, to really take special one-on-one, eye-to-eye time and contact with one another. You're expected to then jump in bed and have hot, juicy sex. And it's really kind of hard. And if you have a situation where you're not really having such a harmonious relationship and you really kind of don't even like the person that you're supposed to jump into bed with, that makes it even worse. So the whole philosophy behind 24/7 foreplay is that foreplay goes on all the time. It's not just what we do in bed before we're getting ready to have sex. We have to like each other. We have to do nice things for each other. We have to say nice things to each other. We have to go out and go on walks. We have to spend time together. Pardon me. One of the things that I talk to my patients and my kids about all the time is having a regular date night where you go and you spend several hours. You don't have to spend any money. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You go and you spend several hours just talking to each other, and not about just what you did today or what you're going to do in the next 10 minutes, because we need to really integrate and keep our lives integrated and intertwined and like each other to make that love play once we get into bed really what it can be. We just need to, it's basically really just being nice to one another, and we get so busy that we kind of just forget about that important piece.
Yeah, yeah, it's very easy with life to fall by the wayside. It's something you have to constantly make an effort. I have to say from personal experience, it's
You Yeah, Heather, you and everybody. I mean, it's
yeah,
kind of like pleasure. Pleasure is kind of a funny term. If you look at the definition for pleasure, you ask people what gives them pleasure. The only thing they think about is sex. They don't really think about anything else that's pleasurable. And you say, well, what do you think pleasurable means? And people just kind of scratch their heads and they're kind of stumped. So it's all a part of the whole. Pleasure is something that you have to take.
yeah.
You have to go outside, you have to look at the sky and say, "Oh my God, that's so gorgeous. Isn't that so beautiful? Oh, smell how good your dinner smells. Oh, that smells so good with your cooking." But it's something you have to take. It doesn't cost anything. It never expires, and there's a limitless supply. But we have to consciously take it in and feel how good it makes you feel good to just look out and see something, or to feel the breeze in your hair, or to hear the birds sing.
Yeah. It just little things. I mean, even my husband and I we're going to an event this evening that Desert Harvest is a part of, and it's here in New York City, and it's called the Pleasure Session, and it's literally a like almost like a conference, but an experiential like exhibit hall floor where you can go and see different types of sensory experiences and things like that. To understand, it might be just watching someone get body paint and or painting erotic art, or just these different things to be able to have a sensory experience. And then there's going to be food for pleasure, sensory pleasure for food. And I mean, I'm really excited for this, so I'll have to tell you.
Oh, please take lots of videos, because that's just perfect. If I could be in two places at once, I would
Hop
teleport.
on a plane.
That sounds fantastic. That's awesome, and we need more of that.
Yeah,
It's
we
not
do.
hard. Yeah, it's not hard.
Yeah, we just need to experiential. So, if you are coupled or not coupled, let's talk self pleasure and how self pleasure can help you and you with a partner.
That it's really a lot of people, especially the pain clients, have a very difficult time with the concept of self-pleasure. So what we begin with the baby steps of what does it feel like to you? How do you like to be touched non-genitally? Do you like a firm stroke? Do you like a light, feathery stroke? And we introduce them to the concept of self-pleasure, again, sort of, a very beginning, like a freshman course. And then we advance them at once they feel sensation and sensuality all of their body. We actually ask them to begin practicing touching their vulva so that they know for themselves what feels good, where, how much touch, how much pressure. Is it here? Is it there? Do you like things pulled? Do you like things rubbed? Do you like to just be held? And so we really add that in as a prescription. Know thy vulva and know thyself as a sensual and sexual being. And then if you so choose to introduce your learning to a partner, that's up to you. But we really feel, and the book was written for those who, the vulva owners, the more you know about your body, the more you're able to feel embodied pleasure and sensation. And then it just absolutely can emanate out to partnerships, if you so choose to introduce your learning to your partners. But there are also exercises you can introduce to your family as a whole, inviting them to understand, what, as a parent, helping your child or anyone who's in your care as a youngster, helping them understand the difference between appropriate and inappropriate touch would be absolutely the gold standard in my book for parenting 101 and beyond. So know your body first. Know what you like. Know what feels neutral. And by all means, know what you don't like. Because if you absolutely know what you don't like, the more you can ask for what you do like and then have that need or have that request filled.
Perfect. And Elizabeth, will you go into a little bit? I know I loved this part in the book about orgasmic energy. Can you talk a little bit about that for me?
Absolutely. Have you ever heard anyone talk about a food orgasm? I have. Have you ever had anybody define their laugh, their giggle with their best girlfriend? They just got together with their college roommates and they just went to fits of laughter. Well, I call those laughgasms. So for me, orgasm is an energy that pulses all through our bodies all the time. Most of us don't pay attention to it. I think of orgasm as a state of when we don't think about anything else than what we're feeling in the moment. I walked in and I saw, this was many years ago, they had just refurbished the Sistine Chapel. And when I looked up and was in that room, I had sensations all over my body. They were not erotic, but my whole body was alight and alive with that sensation of beauty. And it was then that I thought, wow, when they were painting or when they were actually drawing to be painted, I imagine that Michelangelo must have been in a state of orgasmic energy because I imagined he lost sense of all time, lost a sense of feeling hungry, probably never went to the bathroom because they're in such an orgasmic state.
Lose track of time.
Climax is a peak difference, a peak experience that is also part of orgasm, but that is a peak versus orgasmic energy. If we allow it in, it's what makes the world go round.
and I know that both of you describe in the book and Dee, maybe you can go into this a little bit here, and we'll give this question to you. The pleasure calibration scale that you have in the book. Can you talk about how this all evolves into this scale?
And interestingly, it really is a compilation of everything we've just been talking about. Because it really is. It's a 0 to 6 scale. And it starts at 0 where ain't nothing going on, right? Nothing is happening at all.
Mm-hmm.
No arousal, nothing is happening. But as we begin to bring in the sensation, as we begin to feel better, we're starting to creep up that scale. Oh, okay, something's happening. Okay, well, it's getting a little bit better. Okay, now I got it. Okay, yeah. Give me more. And then you get to number 6 and you say, all right, I've come. I've had an orgasm. I've had a climax. So it really is just that, again, to really emphasize the point that we need that arousal. We need that increased sensation, sensuality, that increased feel-good pleasure to get to the highest peak of an orgasmic response.
Perfect. And this kind of goes back a little bit to the couple situation and being able to engage with your partner, that 24/7 foreplay. But one of the things that you, I think, go over wonderfully in the book is talking about communication and about how you open that communication and build that trust within the relationship to build and have a better ultimate sexual experience. Maybe Elizabeth, Dee, either one of you want to talk about this a little bit more in depth?
Sure, I'll take that. It stems from my days as a therapist, as a counselor. So communication, we need to include sexual communication as part of the overall notion of how we speak to each other, how we are with each other. If you can't communicate with your partner about what it is that you want, let's just say for dinner, or you don't speak because you're always fighting, or your pleasantries are lower than the things you say to each other negatively, that's going to impact your intimacy and how you express yourself sexually, how you communicate sexually. Mm-hmm. So just being able to sit and talk with the partner intimately, I don't mean sexually, but intimately, how are you feeling? I understand that happened at work today. What's going on? How did that affect you? That starts to begin to deepen the level of communication and increase our intimacy. And if we can increase our intimacy from a verbal communication standpoint, that tends to afford us the opportunity to be able to communicate more intimately physically through expressions of touch, or stroking the hair, or giving a hand rub or a foot rub or a back rub. And that's going to then further deepen into how we communicate sexually. What I think is really important is that most vulva owners don't know much about what they want or what they like sexually. That brings us back to the solo pleasure and practicing and exploring on your own, so that you can express your needs clearly, and so that you can ask for what you want when you cross the threshold into the sexual realm, and then get your needs and wants and desires fulfilled more often and to a much deeper and more satisfying level.
We're really trying to get rid of what I've heard any number of times from the patients when I was in clinical practice. Mm-hmm. Oh, my husband, oh, my boyfriend, oh, my partner gives me an orgasm.
Sure.
Orgasms are ours. Mm-hmm. We need to know our own bodies, as Elizabeth just described. We need to know what we want, what we do, and what we need, which I don't think it's a real prevailing thought out there. Women don't typically take enough time to go through all of that, which is a bit of a problem. And that's why people always say, oh, a woman's here's a woman's, this is where sex happens in a woman. This is her sex organ. It's her brain, because we can't turn off enough to get into all the things that Elizabeth just talked about. We have to be able to shut down, to really get into our bodies, to drop into our brainstem, to say, okay, let me just be where I need to be and feel what I need to feel. And it just takes time. It's a practice, for sure.
Yeah, it does definitely seem. It was really interesting. Actually, the Kinsey Institute just dropped this morning a study that said that 35% of the participants in the study said that they wanted to avoid talking about, they avoided talking about certain topics completely with their partner, like completely. And they said that mostly it was the anxious and avoidant attachment styles, or if they were older, they were less likely to have open communication or engage in open communication, and that there are certain topics, especially related to sex, that they typically try to avoid. And it just is, it feeds right into this, what you talk about in your book, and about the need for open communication, the need for engaging and feeling comfortable. And Elizabeth, I think you guys talk about this in the book. I thought it was brilliant. The difference between consent and permission, that we lump those two together. And can you kind of really describe, for how you describe in the book, because I think it's brilliant, about the difference between the two of these?
So in this day and age, the buzzword is consent. And what has happened far too often, that we touch without another person's consent, or we touch in an unwanted or uninvited manner. So the concept of consent that I described in the book is all Betty Martin's work. And Betty Martin, in my world, Dr. Betty Martin is the four thoughts, the forward-thinking author on consent, and how she describes, and with full permission that I wrote about it in the book, there is a difference between permission and consent. And consent is really all about what that person wants. Again, if we go back to what I said earlier, most of us don't really know what we want. And therefore, it's like we're sort of willing to have an experience. And how Betty defines it is, willing most often falls in, okay, I give you permission to hold my hand, but I don't really want you to hold my hand. But it's okay. It's something that you want. And so I'm willing to share that experience. And so I go into much more deeply in the book, because it's very confusing. Consent is that you actually want the experience that someone has invited you into, or you want to share an experience with someone else. It's about the difference between wanting and willing. And again, I'm just going to bring us back to if I were to give it to those people listening, really understand what it is that you want, and give consent to those activities. Consent is yes. It's freely given. It's revocable. It's informed. It's enthusiastic, and you can always change your mind. Oh, I gave consent to my partner to rub my hair, but then when he pulls my hair, that's different than the consent that I gave him, and I can ask the activity to stop. Consent is taught widely now in comprehensive sexuality programs and on school campuses, where rape culture is just a disease on our campuses. So if we learn consent, how to ask for it, and also how to get it, then we're going to enjoy more of our experiences more often.
Agreed. I love that. All right. So that is all the questions that I had for both of you ladies today. Is there anything else that I have not covered that you would like to add for our audience?
Oh God, hours, but
I know. How much time do we have? No.
Yeah, really.
Go buy the book. There you
Really.
go.
Yeah, well, yeah, that would be great. And ask questions. Oh, Elizabeth.
So I have something that's actually exciting. It's happened over the last few days. The Pleasure Prescription has been nominated in 2 categories for an ACT Book Award of the Year. And so ASECT, for those who don't know, it is the American Academy of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, ASECT. So we're incredibly proud that the book was just nominated in 2 categories. And I think now all of the readers are very busy reading all of those books nominated. And hopefully the Pleasure Prescription will be awarded a prize. Book of the Year.
Congrats to both of you. I can't wait to see that. I'll definitely, probably one of us will be there this year. So definitely, hopefully we'll be there cheering you on. So we did have this one question here that popped up. Any tips on how to bring my need for a lubricant into the conversation? I don't want him to think it's a lack on their end and not due to medical reasons.
This is everything that we've just been talking about. It's the vaginal tissue. Just let me, Elizabeth, I will talk about normal arousal and the value of normal arousal, and I'll let you do adding the lubricant to help things along. We know that before any type of penetration, when it's either with a sex toy or with a penis or with a finger, whatever it is, that if there's mucus production, if there's an increased fluid produced in the vaginal wall, it actually is protective of the vagina. The vaginal tissue is very thin. It's very friable. It can get injured and damaged. So the best, of course, is a natural arousal where that mucus is created. That mucus helps to protect the skin. It helps to protect the flushing out of the vaginal canal after any activity, and it helps to keep it where it needs to be. Pelvic floor exercises help do the same thing and improve that health. Elizabeth, I'm going to let you go back on to the use of lubricants on a regular basis.
Oh, absolutely. So the use, what I try to invite my clients to explore is how to make applying lubrication fun. I mean, we all like, sex is about friction, going in and out, body parts rubbing together. Well, so I don't know if you'll be able to hear it, but right now my hands are dry and they're kind of sticky and I can hear it. It just doesn't feel that good. But after I put moisturizing lotion on it or massage oil, I'm going to glide and slide, and it's much more pleasurable. So unfortunately, we have this belief, it's a myth, that all of us like lubricate and get really, wet down there every time we engage in sexual activity. That's not true. Some people have copious amounts of lubrication, and that's wonderful, and that's normal for them, while others barely produce enough lubrication, natural lubrication on their own. Many of my friends have lube in their glove compartments, in their purses, their bedside table, and even in that messy drawer in the kitchen, because their bodies don't make enough natural lubricant. Well, first of all, find ones that really work for your body. There are a number of Desert Harvest, a natural lubrication, aloe vera based.
Aloe glass.
Out there at the typical, the typical Walgreens or CVS, they're loaded with things that are naturally drying agents and glycerin. So find one, aloe vera based, that works well for body, and apply it yourself. Ask your partner to apply it as part of foreplay, and then do the same with their body that's going to be rubbing and possibly inserted inside of you. Use that to make it like a slip and slide. It's way more fun than sliding across a dry piece of burlap. So you
And it
can
again
help educate.
protects
Yes.
protects the vagina.
So
And that's why I wanted to start with that, because it protects the vagina just from a health perspective. So if that could be the way to address it, I'm just protecting my vagina, and it's either with me or if it's with lube, keep lube everywhere and use it.
At any age,
At
any
any
age.
age.
Everybody thinks this happens as you get older, and this is at any age.
No, especially with birth control pills. That can be, I've heard my patients for years talk about that making a big difference.
Yeah.
Don't be ashamed of it.
I have so many girlfriends, and they'll be in their 20s, and they'll be like, "Oh, I don't need lube. I'm in my 20s." And I'll be like, "But sex can be, they had uncomfortable sex," and I'm like, "Add lubrication." I'm like, oh.
Right.
So
Right.
anybody, I always wholeheartedly, and I always point out, and I think that they put it here, so I'm just going to put this disclaimer out there, that we have the Aloe Glide, we have the Bum Bums, but the Bum Bums is going to be for anal use, and that is a completely different biome that you do not want to use a vaginal lubricant for. Very, very, very important. Those are two different biomes. One is acidic, one is alkaline. Don't use a vaginal lubricant for your anus. So,
yes, wonderful. Thank you, Heather, for that. Your products are amazing and
thank you.
incredibly helpful. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for being here. We have had a great talk. We're going to put this out to the world and put up, we put up your website. Let's put it up here one last time. And if you have any questions too, afterwards, this will be posted live on Desert Harvest YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of social. And so if you put up a question there, we will make sure that we get that to Dee or into Elizabeth to get you an answer. Definitely. So still put up your questions, and we know it's the middle of the day and some people might be at work. So this will be streamed later, and put up your questions. Not a problem. We'll be happy to get those over to Elizabeth and Dee and get those answered. So
wonderful.
Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Your book is amazing. Everybody go check it out. This is their website right here, pleasuremovement.com, and enjoy your Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Day.